To thank the organizers for this very nice conference. It's a pleasure to be here. So what I would like to do here to discuss SID Gauzy fractals. So what I'm going to do first is to, as a motivation, to recall a few elements about Gauzy fractals. You've already heard a little about it in several lectures, but I will recall several things on examples. And then I will discuss what I mean by SID framework. And in the title we have a two-word. It's really a work in progress, and you'll see that there are a lot of questions that are asked and few answers for the moment, except on particular classes or examples. So concerning Gauzy fractals, it's an object that can be associated with a sequence or the symbolic dynamical system generated by a sequence. And as an example, I will take the example that Gauzy used when he introduced this notion in the 80s. And so this is an object, a geometric object, whose aim is to capture dynamical spectral properties of this combinatorial object, which is a substitution, which is a rule, which replaces letters by words, which generates infinite words. And then the idea is to try to understand what this infinite word means in terms of spectral properties, diffraction properties, and so on and so forth. And one motivation for capturing, one tool for capturing features of this infinite word consists in introducing the Gauzy fractal. So first we need, I'm sorry, no, yes, is it okay? Yeah. So we need some algebraic elements to define this object. So first remark we can do is that this substitution has an algebraic feature, which is a Piso feature, which is to say that if you look at it in an Abelianized way, if you associate with this object a matrix, which corresponds to Abelianize everything, that is to say, you put in columns the Abelianizations of the images of the letters, like for a linear map. So you count the number of occurrences of each letters in the images. So you have a 1, a 2, a 1, a 3 in the image of 2. In the image of 3 you have a 1. So you get a matrix like that, which has the nice property of being Piso. It's irreducible. It has one eigenvalue which is larger than 1, and the other eigenvalues are smaller than 1 in modulus. So it's a characteristic polynomial of a Piso number. So we have this nice algebraic property, which means that when you iterate the substitution in an Abelianized way, you iterate this matrix, you have one dominating direction and one dominant eigenvalue, one dominant line, one eigenline on which the matrix is expanding, and one contracting plane. So the idea will be to try to capture information on the contracting plane. And to do that, thank you very much. Okay, I will try not to move too much. So, no, so maybe I will speak very loud, or okay, let's see what happens. So to do that, we represent the infinite word generated by the substitution as a three-dimensional line by replacing letters by vectors of the canonical basis, or by taking the Abelianization. So you replace a word by the vector whose coordinates correspond to the number of occurrences of each letter in this vector. So this is still this same Abelianization process. So you can represent the infinite fixed point of this substitution like an infinite line just by taking the Abelianized of each prefix of each length. So you get a line like that. And since the matrix was expanding in one direction, and it's not difficult to see that the fixed point, this representation goes in the direction of this expanding direction. So we'd like to know how far you get from this expanding direction. So you want to kill this action and understand what happens around this direction. So to understand that, you kill this direction by projecting according to this direction and projecting on the eigen contracting plane. And then you get points, and if you take the closure, you get such a shape, which corresponds to the fractals we have seen in the previous lecture of today. And you can select points according to the last type of letter you have seen, and then you can put colors. So you get these three types of colors of points. And what is miraculous here is that these three areas do not overlap except on sets of zero measure. I will, at the end of the lecture, I will give a short proof of this fact. But here it's not, so it's quite remarkable, but it's not a small detail. It will allow us to understand the dynamics we have behind this system by playing with this representation. So we have this kind of properties, and we have also a tiling, as we have seen in the previous lecture. We have either a periodic tiling. Here I forget about my division into three colors. I consider my fractal as a whole piece, and I can have a periodic tiling or an aperiodic tiling by involving this time the three types of pieces. So we have this remarkable fact. This one corresponds to say that the symbolic dynamical system associated with my Fibonacci infinite world as discrete spectrum, and this one captures the self-similarity properties as discussed by Anne, for instance, in the beginning of her lecture. So what we have used here is this piezo property. We have used the fact that we started with a piezo substitution, that is to say substitution, whose incidence matrix has a characteristic polynomial, which is the minimal polynomial of a piezo number. This implies that our substitution is primitive, that is to say there is a power of the incident matrix which has only positive entries. And we will also work in the unit framework, although you've seen with Jörg's and Wolfgang's lecture that you can extend things in the non-unit case. But here we will restrict to the unit case. So more generally, we've seen what Rosie did with this example of the Fibonacci substitution, but more generally, what we do, we start with a primitive substitution. We want to understand its symbolic dynamical system, so what we do, we take a fixed point or an infinite word generated by this substitution, maybe by taking a power of this substitution. You consider the action of the shift, which takes out the first letter on this infinite word. You take the closure of the orbit of this infinite word under the action of the shift. You get a symbolic dynamical system, that is to say a closed subset of the set of infinite words, infinite sequences over the alphabet we are considering. And the piezo conjecture, the discrete spectrum question is the following. Under which conditions on the substitution sigma can we represent the substitutive dynamical system as a geometric one? Geometric ones means here a translation on a compact abelian group. This group can be an n-dimensional torus, or can be an abelian PID group or product of such groups. So we'd like to be able to give a representation of this system as a translation on an abelian, compact abelian group. And to do that, this is why we were interested in tiling properties, because the tilings we have seen, if we have, for instance, periodic tiling, then the piece which tiles in a periodic way will be a fundamental domain for a torus, and we'll capture with this or a geometric representation. So that is the general framework. And just as a remark, here I am quite vague when I say to give a geometric representation. So you have two types of isomorphisms that you could consider when you discuss dynamical systems, either mesotheoretic isomorphism or topological one. In this case, in this particular case of primitive substitutions, both frameworks are the same. You can either ask for you can either look for continuous eigenvalues or just mesotheoretic eigenvalues. So this is result due to Ost, which has been extended by Cortez, Durand, Ost, and Mas to the framework of linearly recurrent systems, and I will discuss this system. So this is why later, this is why I allude to this result, just to say that the framework where we have here substitutions extends in a natural way to the framework of linearly recurrent, linearly repetitive systems. I will define them in a few minutes, but just to have this, let's have this in mind. And as a basic example which motivates, in a sense, all this, is the Fibonacci case. If you start from the Fibonacci substitution, the one you discussed in your colloquium, A gives A, B gives A. If you do all this machinery with the Fibonacci substitution, Fibonacci infinite world, you get yes, thank you very much, that's a very good idea. So in the Fibonacci case, one has an isomorphism between this dynamic of system and just adding the golden ratio mod 1. Also, well, no, I'm very cautious and I don't take any more risks. So this is the general framework we have, and what is called the Piso conjecture is that if the substitution, if the object we are considering here as this Piso property, then we have discrete spectrum. So that's the general framework of Piso conjecture. So this is why, to consider this question, we start from the geometric viewpoint, and to tackle the geometric viewpoint, we want to get our geometric realization in terms of rosy fractals. So more generally, you take a substitution, you consider this abelianization map that we have seen, which replaces words by vectors, and we try to represent infinite words. If they are two letters, like in the Fibonacci case, like that, and you recover some classical framework on cut and project words, where you can associate with the Fibonacci tiling a word, first by looking at this picture, this selected set of points, and then you can code the steps you will see by 0 and 1 if they are horizontal and vertical, and that's exactly the abelianization process that we are performing here. So on 3 letters or on more letters, you consider this abelianization process. You take a point which is generated by sigma. When I say periodic, it's just a fixed point of some, maybe of some power of sigma. Since we start with a primitive substitution, we're sure to have a fixed point by taking some power. So we take such an infinite word. So it's not periodic in the usual sense, but periodic under the action of sigma. So I'll start with a primitive Piso substitution. Then we can once again project onto the contracting plane according to the expanding eigenline, and we define this object that we have seen, which corresponds to taking the abelianized images of the prefixes, projecting, taking the closure, and in the 2-letter case we will get something here which will be an interval, and on the 3-letter case we get our rosy fractal. So that's what I wanted to recall about rosy fractals in general, and that is my motivation. I would like to extend this to more general objects than substitutions. What is the restriction here is if we start with substitution, we are definitely in an algebraic framework. I would like to be able to reach parameters that are not necessarily algebraic. Why would I like to do that? Is because rosy fractals, beside the fact that they capture the spectrum, have lots of interesting properties with respect to Diophantine approximation. Anna has alluded to this in her lecture. So this gives you nice information about the way you consider two-dimensional translation on the torus. This has application in discrete geometry with discrete planes, as we have seen also in the lecture by Anne. So my aim is to try to get such constructions for any parameter. So I don't want only to iterate one single substitution. I want to have non-algebraic parameters involved. And so my strategy will be the so-called SADIP strategy, which will consist in iterating not only one substitution, but a sequence of substitutions. My motivation behind is also to be able to work with multidimensional continuous fraction algorithms. And I mentioned here the terminology SAD conjecture. So SAD comes from Pierre. So just ask Pierre why he has had this great idea about SAD. S is for substitution, ADIC is for p-adic. So this is really an analogous of p-adic world in the world of substitutions, in the symbolic world. And the SAD conjecture is some kind of idea which dates back to the 90s, something like that. The idea is to try to find a description of symbolic flows, I mean symbolic dynamical systems, in terms of their linear complexity, of their complexity. The complexity is this function that we've discussed already, which counts the number of factors of a given length. So the idea is to try to characterize the sets of infinite worlds, which have only at most linear number of factors of a given length. So we know, for instance, if we take a discrete line, the picture we have seen before, if we take the words which correspond to such lines, they have complexity n+1. We are in the family of so-called Sturmian worlds. So more generally, we would like to be able to understand what are worlds of at most linear complexity. The number of substitutions is finite. It's like a new alphabet, but the composition will be finite. So maybe the best is to see it in a historical viewpoint. So the definition is quite technical, but I recall it because this is the way it has been introduced in the first time. It comes from a nice result by Cassaigne, saying that if you have a set of infinite worlds, a symbolic flow, which has at most linear complexity. So you take all the finite factors of this set of infinite worlds, and for a given length, you have at most Cn factors of this length, with C being a fixed constant. And then, so we have at most linear complexity. Then what is interesting here is that the first difference of this complexity function is bounded. A priori, there is no reason, having an at most linear function, to have a first difference which is bounded. So but the fact that here we work in a particular framework of counting words makes that this first difference is bounded. And with this information, Ferenczi has been able to formalize this, and by starting with any symbolic system which is minimal corresponds to the words of types linear repetitivity or linear uniform recurrence. Minimals means that the waiting time between two successive occurrences of the same factor is uniformly bounded for factors of the same length. So minimal is quite a strong requirement, but quite natural. So if you take a minimal system which has at most linear complexity, then you can decompose it in such a form. So what does it mean? You might have to change the size of the alphabet. So you might take a larger alphabet. But then you will come back to your initial alphabet like that, via substitution, via a map which goes from the alphabet T to the alphabet A. Here it's written that it goes from words to words, but in fact you can make an operation allowing one to go from letter to letters. And then that's what I call asadic process. You recover an infinite sequence of substitutions with values in a finite set S. So S is in your new set of digits, infinite composition of substitutions, which generates all the language of the system as follows. You have starting letters. You apply your substitution with this order, sigma 1 to the sigma n, which is maybe a priori not the most natural order. So you apply things like that, and then at the end you come back to your initial alphabet. So by asadic process, that's what I mean. This is something which plays the role of iteration of one substitution, but instead of that we have an infinite sequence of substitutions with values in a finite alphabet, and you take such limits. plus this condition, and we will see this interest, we have some growing condition on each letter for such kind of process. So to make it maybe more simple, what we have to recall, when we say acidic term, then that's this kind of process. You have a finite set of substitution, a morphism that I've forgotten here, I'm sorry, and an infinite sequence of substitutions, and you take such limits. When you look at such definition, you might say, well, it's maybe stupid to take this morphism at the end. You might say, okay, let's take a finite number of substitutions, but we can allow the fact that we change the alphabet for each substitution, not to have this kind of arbitrary morphism. So you might discuss a little bit the definition, but that's the idea, taking an infinite limit of substitutions, working like that. And that will replace, that will extend the notion of substitution. If you discuss this in front of someone like Julien Cassel, who has some kind of Leibnizism, there is no in him, he will say, okay, I would like to discuss S-adic with a small s like the sequence of substitutions, and not like the set of substitutions. In some sense, it's quite misleading. It's maybe the difference between a random walk and a fixed point of substitution. I mean, here, not only we take a finite set of substitutions, but we have a particular sequence generating it. So it's not only that we play with every possible infinite limit of the substitution. We have fixed the way we are iterating them. So let's do some remarks which are due to Julien Cassel. So I have, in the Félix theorem, we have had this statement. It was required that the length, I'm sorry for this copy-paste, which is quite bad. I'm sorry, I meant as a condition this one. The limit of the composition on every letter tends to infinity. Not only the iteration of one substitution, the limit of any composition, the length tends to infinity. So we see why we need this extra assumption, and really let's stress this fact that to be acidic is not an intrinsic. If you just say S with S infinite, the set of substitution, it's not a property of the sequence, but a way to construct it. So I illustrate it in the next slide with this example due to Julien Cassel, which says that if you don't require something on the length of the growth of the length of the iterations, then you can say that everything is acidic. With this simple example, you take an infinite sequence, any infinite sequence, and as substitutions, you let in change, you take the identity on the alphabet, and you add some extra letter, and for the image of this extra letter, you propagate information given by the index of the substitution to the right. I mean, you have your alphabet A, and you take as many substitutions as the letter of the alphabet. They all act like identity on the letters of the alphabet, and on the extra letter, they propagate the information given by the name of the substitution. And we see that on the letters of the alphabet, you just perform identity, so the length is 1. And in fact, you're generating your word, because if you apply this to each letter of the word, you start with L, then you create L and the first letter, and if you apply this, you are generating your word just preceded by your L. And then, as a map phi, you keep the letters unchanged of the alphabet, and you delete your L. So you start with the first letter, U0. The image of L is L U0, and then you apply the other substitutions, and then it gives you the image on L U0, and it propagates the image. It gives you L U1 and L U0 U1, and so on and so forth. So every sequence is acidic if you are not cautious enough. So it's just a warning saying that this framework of SADCT is quite convenient to express things, but it has to be carefully precise. Made carefully precise. And to be more general, it enters the well-known frameworks. Yes. To ensure. Exactly. So that the point of the SAD conjecture. So it's a priori you're not sure to have linear complexity. And let's say it. Let's see it directly on the. I will skip just this. I just wanted to stress the fact that it's in a framework of ideas quite natural, which corresponded to, for instance, getting, like Lossut did, arithmetic codings of automorphism of the torus, or understanding beta expansions, and so on and so forth. So I skip this, and I come to what you say, and I will come back to this later, the connection with complexity. So you asked me whether there was some nice condition guaranteeing linear complexity, and in fact, we'll see with these examples once again due to Cassel that is not that obvious. This example works as follows. It takes two substitutions, one which has quadratic complexity. If a substitution is not primitive, it might have quadratic complexity, and if it's primitive, we are sure it has linear complexity. So you mix a substitution with a quadratic complexity, one with linear complexity, and you mix it in such a way that the quadratic complexity wins. And one can check that this particular SAD sequence has quadratic complexity, so F wins. But, so that might be seen as natural, but if you take some grouping, if you put some parentheses in a nice way, and if you note that G squared is equal to G, you can also decompose this on the substitution F applied, F composed with G and G composed with F, and both substitutions are primitive. So you'll have an infinite world, which is a composition of primitive substitutions, which has quadratic complexity. And a priori, this was an idea that was formulated by Bouchanisan, for instance, saying that he expected that the composition of two primitive substitutions would guarantee a linear complexity. And we see that it's not that simple. So the essence of the Piso conjecture is to try to find a nice way guaranteeing linear complexity. We know that when we have linear complexity, we have acidic decomposition. Now we are trying to find nice conditions on linear complexity to get nice condition on acidicity to get linear complexity, and for the moment it's still an open question. There have been some nice formulations by a student by Fabien Durand, Julien Leroy, but it's still very technical in its formulation. And to come back to my previous slides, no, I'm going further. Just to introduce some terminology, so we've seen this problem. We can have systems which are of quadratic complexity, and you can ask, by the way, what is my problem with quadratic complexity? And in fact, remember that my motivation was to have Rosy fractals, and with quadratic complexity, it's difficult to have something which will build a nice Rosy fractal. For instance, in terms of cut and project, you might think that the natural generalization of Sturmian words and discrete lines is to take a square and to shift it. So in the Fibonacci case, you take a square, you shift it along the line, and you get something nice. So you might think it's interesting to take a cube, to shift it along the line, and to see what happens. You can get so-called billiard words. They have quadratic complexity, and one might say, okay, let's work with this kind of things. But these words have quadratic complexity, and it's difficult to write them in an acidic way and to recover something which will play the role of a continuous fraction expansion, which will allow to work with this object and to have something which will play the role of Rosy fractal. So this is why we are strongly motivated by linear complexity. And then as assumptions on these systems, we will try to find something which plays the role of primitivity. primitivity is something that says at least that you have something like Perron Frobenius. It's not as strong as Piso, but at least you have a positive eigenvector, an eigenvector with positive entries. So what will play the role of primitivity here is to say that you have some length with a typo here, I'm sorry, saying that if you, whatever the place where you are, you take this composition starts going from n to n plus l minus 1, and then in this finite product of matrices, you'll have positivity. That is to say, this finite product of matrices is primitive, or equivalently, this substitution is primitive. So yes, the R is L. So yes, sorry, yes. Not only LBC, that's thank you very much. So that's something which will play the role in a reasonable way of primitivity for substitutions. We will see that the idea of having bounded partial quotients is quite natural. Some really strongly influenced by partial quotients in continuous fraction expansion. So by partial quotients, I mean that every substitution occurs with bounding gaps in your expansion. So that looks quite reasonable. And then there is a set of conditions introduced by Fabien Durand, which look quite technical and artificial, but we will see where they come from. But they are not very, they are very strong. The proper property is that you'll have to begin with the same letter and end with the same letter. So that's quite disturbing. I mean, this is a very strong requirement. But let's see where it comes from. So we have seen the connection between acidicity and complexity, and let's go one step further. Let's see the connections with linear recurrence. I mentioned just linear recurrence when I mentioned the result on continuous eigenvalues a few slides before. So linear recurrence is a measure of aperiodic order and means the following: you don't wait too much to see a given factor. You don't wait too much means you wait a linear time. So a return word is the time you wait to get the successive occurrence of a fixed factor you're considering. You take at the successive occurrences and you call return words the time you have spent between two successive occurrences. And then we say that the sequence is linearly recurrent or linearly repetitive if the length of every return word is smaller than the constant times the length of the words you are considering. So this is something you find as the name of linear repetitivity invariance. So such a sequence has always linear complexity. It's not too difficult to look at that. And it's much stronger than being of linear complexity because among the world of Stirner sequences, the ones that are linearly recurrent correspond to the ones that correspond to codings of lines whose slope has partial bounded partial quotients. So it was widely believed that in the SID terms, linear recurrence would correspond to being primitive and to having bounded partial quotients. And I will just open a parenthesis with respect to Lorenzo Sabuni lecture this morning. He alluded to this result of Goodman-Strauss, which can be in a very sketchy way described as follows. As soon as you have something substitutive for a tiling, and as soon as you are at least in a two-dimensional space, then you can describe things via local matching modes. So this is something which is completely untrue in the one-dimensional case. So that means that if you look at discrete planes like the ones Anne mentioned, so varying groups, if I'm not exactly. Oops. Really. So if you look at if you look at such structures which correspond to the, for instance, cubic parameters, which has been generated in a substitutive way, then there exist such local rules. So that's it's proved by Xavier Bressot and Mathieu Sapik in particular for discrete planes associated with the Fibonacci substitution, as Anne made in her lecture when she was able to generate these discrete planes. So we have something quite surprising. You're able, by enlarging the size of your alphabet, so your discrete planes in some 3 types of faces, you might add some colors on faces. You can input an extra coloration, which allows you, just in a local way, to say whether you belong to something which is infinite, which is flat at infinity, which is a plane. So this is completely untrue for lines. You are not able to see whether a line in a local way is a line, a cliff of a line. It's because of the fact that in the one-dimensional case, subshifts of finite types or Sophic shifts have positive entropy, and here this corresponds to things which have zero entropy. So this is a big difference, big issue between the one-dimensional and the two-dimensional case. And just as an open question, which is in fact badly stated, I think, like that, my question is the following. Can you characterize discrete planes that have linear repetitivity? That is to say, if you look at a pattern, you don't want to wait too much to find this pattern again. That's what is linear repetitivity. So you take a ball of radius m, and you want to find the smallest ball of the smallest m, such that any ball of radius n contains all configurations of some smaller radius, small m. And we call this repetitivity function. And so my question is to characterize discrete planes, I mean the normal vectors of discrete planes, which have linear repetitivity, for which this property holds. This is true, once again, if the parameters are cubic, for instance, if you come from some substitutions. But how to obtain such a characterization? So for lines, once again, that's true if only the bounded partial quotients with the continued fraction expansion are bounded. What would be a similar characterization for planes, except that one should not expect such a characterization because we are not able to characterize cubic numbers in terms of multidimensional continued fraction expansion. So the answer would not be in these terms, but I have no idea of the way of finding such answer. Maybe some almost everywhere result à la Kinshin, for instance, but so an arithmetic answer to such a problem is quite unclear. But I come back to the subject, and subject of, so I was discussing connections between linear recurrence, linear repetitivity, and acidicity, and then I will recall results by Fabien Durand. So I discuss here the connections between being acidic and linear recurrent. So when you are linear recurrent, you are with bounded gaps in some way. So the idea was that linear recurrence and primitivity were equivalent. I think I'm yes, that is to say, the way to express yes, linear recurrence was something which was expressed in terms of acidicity. That was the idea. And so what played the role of was this notion of primitivity. So Fabien Durand in the first paper thought he proved the equivalence between linear recurrence and primitivity, and then he found an example of primitive acidic expansion which is not linearly recurrent, although it has linear complexity. So this example is given by 2 substitutions of constant length. It gives linear complexity thanks to that, but it doesn't give linear recurrence. So it's primitive SID, that is to say if you take any finite product of them, you have a positive matrix. So you have this strong requirement of primitivity, but even like that, you don't have linear recurrence. And he was obliged to add this artificial condition of being proper for this characterization of linear recurrence, which is quite uncomfortable. But what I would like to stress is SIDCT is a nice way to characterize linear recurrence, nice modulo this proper assumption. And to come back to this idea of Goodman-Strauss on local matching rules, people have tried to extend this property of substitutions imply local matching rules, and at some stage people have thought that linear recurrence could be a good framework to extend this, but for some nice argument by Anthony Quast on countability problem, countability argument, having local rules gives you only countable possibilities. If you take all the tilings you can generate using local matching rules, you have a countable number of possible tilings, and linearly recurrent is already, you have an uncountable number of linearly recurrent or such SID systems. But the idea I want to stress here is that SIDCT is the next step after substitutions, but we have to be cautious when we discuss SIDCT. Even for a property like linear recurrence, it's difficult to express only in acidic terms. Yes? You said acidic primitive. Yes, exactly the same argument as you do for primitive substitutions. No, linear complexity. Linear recurrence implies linear complexity. Yeah, it's a linear complexity, but not LR. So primitive acidic implies linear complexity, and not so the subtle point here. It was to have something which was not LR. So I come back to my motivations, which were to have rosy fractals in this framework. So Anne has already given examples of acidic expansions, which have some meaning, for instance, Arnold-Rossi sequences, and expansions associated with multidimensional continuum fractions. And also, just to mention difficulties which arise with Arnold-Rossi sequences, there exist Arnold-Rossi sequences, so Arnold-Rossi sequences correspond to sequences which are generated in an acidic way with 3 substitutions. And we still have in mind that we want to generalize to find rosy fractals. So if you iterate these substitutions, you might stay within, you might go toward a direction, you are generating a direction which corresponds to the frequencies of letters. But even in this case, for instance, you might not stay within a bounded distance of the line you are generating. This is what has been proved here in combinatorial terms, in terms of balance. But the idea is that if you iterate such substitutions by taking arbitrarily large partial quotients, then you are going in the direction of a line which corresponds to the frequency of letters which occur in such an infinite world. But you might go away from this direction at the logarithmic speed. So this is the problem we might have. So just to formulate the issues we have, so we have, suppose we have an infinite world generated in an acidic process. Suppose we represent it geometrically as we have seen before. Really the question is, just to be able to make a rosy fractal, are we going to stay at the bounded distance of the line? So we have all the problems of convergence of product of matrices which occur, and that's one of the main problems. So the problem is to try to generalize Perron-Frobenius properties. So what we are able to do is quite disappointing. For instance, we will see that we can go toward the direction in angle. I would say it's a weak convergence property. But we have not necessarily criteria, nice criteria, giving you a stronger convergence. We will be able to say that our points go, the angle between the points we create tends to 0 with respect to line we want to approximate, but we have nothing concerning the distance. So for instance, we have a very weak property, weak with respect to all the strengths of Peru-Frobenius theorem, which says that if you have a matrix that you can find in your expansion, so here I stated in terms of product of matrices. So we had aesthetic expansions, we take the Abelianization, and the question we have now are convergence problems. I can translate all this in terms of product of matrices, and my products are like in the aesthetic case, product of matrices which go from index 1 to k, and we look at such limits. And we would like to know whether, starting from any vector with positive entries, and if you apply such product of matrices, whether you recover something which is unidimensional or not. So you have such a sufficient condition. If you find a positive matrix in your expansion by taking together some terms, well, okay, you apply, you have the contracting properties which occur thanks to positive matrices, and then you are unidimensional. Okay, that's at least a criterion to prove that you are converging toward the direction, but it's very far from what we need. So this the things we can do for the moment, and since I'm quite late, if I'm not mistaken, I'm 5 minutes, okay. So what I would like to do is to consider aesthetic expansions with respect to continuous fraction algorithms, since my goal was to try to get Rosy fractals in general for any parameter. So my idea is to say that I take one direction that I want to approximate. I consider a continuous fraction expansion, like these ones, expressed in terms of Euclidean, generalized Euclid's algorithm. So consider a line that I would like, for instance, to approximate, a line directed by the vector x1, x2, x3 with positive coordinates. I've got this line, and my goal now will be to input this direction, this vector in a machine corresponding to such a continuous fraction algorithm, to get matrices that I will translate in terms of substitutions, and to try to see whether I'm able to approximate a line. And that's exactly also what Anne did in a dual way, or to try to approximate a plane. That's exactly the same machinery. Except that this morning Anne used the E1 sigma star formalism to work with discrete planes, and here we can already consider substitutions to see what happens. So let's take classical continuous fraction algorithms, which are quite natural. It consists in giving a rule saying which number you will subtract to the other ones. In the two-dimensional case, we have two numbers. You subtract the smallest to the largest. You have 3 numbers here. You decide a rule. And my question here will be, are we able to associate with taking such an algorithm with any direction a Rosy fractal? So the answer is far from being yes. There are a lot of problems, but so there are a cornerstone I will mention later. But just to say what we can do for the moment, we can, for instance, try to see what happens when we make numerical simulations with these substitutions, and to see, let's apply an algorithm, for instance, a fully subtractive, which corresponds to subtract the smallest to the 2 other ones. Let's get a sequence of matrices that we transform in substitutions, and let's see what happens. And the question is, do we have something which looks like a discrete line? Are we at a bounded distance of a line? Does it behave a nice way? So that's what we are doing now. We take these algorithms and we are trying to test them with respect to these properties. Are we staying not far from the line? which can be translated, if you prefer, in convergence properties of these algorithms in arithmetical terms. So, for instance, we know that for Jacobi-Perron, we have a decent behavior in the sense that we have exponential convergence almost everywhere. So we are trying to look at these algorithms from this viewpoint and to see once again how far you are from the line. We'll see what happens on the contracting plane, and to see that is to use Hans. What Hans has done, this machinery, is to look at this by looking at the cube and the unit cube and taking the formalism discussed this morning via E1 star, and then trying to make the reverse of what is done here. So, yes, we have a succession of substitutions. We dualize everything. We have such a picture. And the idea will be to look at the topology of this picture. If we have something which has a nice topology, it gives you information on the contracting, on the transverse direction. So if we have something which has a nice topology, it could be a good candidate to understand how far you are from the line. Nice topology in a wide sense. So I've taken all these examples of cosine fraction expansions. And for instance, in Jacobi-Perron, we see some kind of massive behavior. It resembles an hexagon in some way. Here you have something which is not that well distributed like a ball for Poincaré. For Brun, we have something which is not too bad. And then for Selmer, we see that we have something quite strange. So we use this viewpoint on the transverse plane with the dual formalism in order to look for a good candidate for having a nice rosy fractal. Remember also that these are the things which will allow us, when we normalize, to get a rosy fractal. So if we have a nice topology in the approximations, then we are more likely to have a nice rosy fractal. So that's what works for the moment, but what we are able to do, play with these things and trying to get topological properties like connectedness, like Anne explained this morning. So for the subtractive, we have this. But now I will end with the problem we have, the cornerstone where we are. Is the following problem. Remember that I mentioned that the three pieces of the rosy fractal were disjoint in measure once renormalized. So suppose, and we are not that far, but suppose we have been able to renormalize this and to have an expansion which remains at the bounded distance of a line and so on and so forth. So suppose we have a nice candidate for a rosy fractal. The question is how to prove that the pieces are disjoint. And then what we do in the substitution case is really related to Perron-Frobenius. We use the JEFS equation which is behind, and we use Perron-Frobenius to prove that the measure of the pieces are disjoint. By JEFS, I mean the equation, the self-similar equation that these pieces satisfy, which is obtained just by applying the fact that the word we are starting with is a fixed point of a substitution. So it's a very natural machinery which gives a lot of information. Information like that. And so the problem we have now is really to be able to prove the disjointness of the pieces, and then to be able after that to prove maybe tiling properties of the rosy fractal being hot and spectral properties, for instance, of reality. So the problem we have is by taking the idea of this morning of zooming out, zooming in. For instance, we are able in some sense to zoom out to see what happens outside of the pieces via the formalism E1 star, but to see inside of the pieces where we have pieces with disjoint measure is really a big problem we have. Thank you very much.